Greetings, folks. So today I wanted to think a little bit about space and how we live in it. It's something that most people don't really consider, but the Earth is itself a spaceship. It's been the topic of science fiction periodically, but because it's all around us, because it's more or less what we're adapted to, our little piece of the cosmos where we can actually exist with enough air, with enough warmth, with enough water, and all the other biotic elements that make it possible for us to continue to survive day to day, we really don't consider the fact that we are just flying through the cosmos at really quite an exceptional speed in all kinds of interesting and dizzying directions as the sun follows in its orbit and the Earth follows around it, and the galaxy goes spiraling. So, what we really want to do when we begin to move out beyond Earth is to eventually be able to start to replicate the planet, or something akin to it. Some sort of healthy biosystem that can survive. We see this again in science fiction quite often. The idea of generation ships or giant space stations that can hold an entire ecosystem that can be sustained as people go on for extended periods is one that has been very exciting in the past, one that we have often dreamed about. So it's something that we should look forward to seeing if we can do it in a smaller scale. Certainly the testing so far on this has made progress. The biggest exploration into this area so far, the largest experiment, is called Biosphere 2, which basically is exactly what it describes. It's the Biosphere facility is a large construct in the Arizona desert that basically is an enclosure comprising multiple different biomes and habitats that are designed to work together to try and mimic some of the natural cycles that we see, not just in one part of the Earth or in one biosystem, but in the entire planet. Everything from a small ocean with several different species, corals and things, to a tropical rainforest with trees and understory, and trying to mimic that entire habitat. It was certainly tall enough and large enough to achieve this, although some of the thermals that you get with a giant glass structure such as this in the middle of the Arizona desert were going to cause some potential heating issues. There was a number of different issues came up as it went along, but ultimately it did succeed at the most important element of what it was trying to achieve, namely to act as an experimental facility where we could learn what works and what doesn't, where the major problems lie, and start to really narrow in and resolve those. Unfortunately, after running only 2 sessions with the full habitat in full mode with the people living as best they could inside, the project, at least as a full closed ecosystem concept, was basically shuttered. It still operates today and actually does good science, working as an element of the University of Arizona, I believe. But it is no longer trying to recreate the entire Earth's biosphere. And doing so has been something that has been a lot less common and popular. One thing we want to try and do is to make sure we can do this on a smaller scale. In some cases, we need to do it very small indeed. If we wanted to, say, try and provide the majority of supplies for biotic regeneration on the International Space Station, we need to do it in a much smaller volume than something like even Biosphere. And it's very unlikely that we would be able to achieve anything like a fully regenerative ecosystem. We don't have not only the understanding, but we don't really have the space. One of the reasons that Earth can work, one of the major advantages that it has over other attempts and spaces that have messed with us before, is the fact that Earth is quite voluminous. It has, for all the fact that it's a tiny speck, a great deal of space relative to the biological things that live on it. And it has an excess of all of the elements needed. It has more carbon than is ever being used by life forms. It has more water than the life forms need. It has more oxygen than is being used on a regular basis. Now, if all of these were just left to themselves and we're not periodically going through processes of regeneration, eventually they'd run down. And in fact, the fact that we have so much oxygen is thought to be an effect of life forms on the planet having produced most of it for a very long time, when really there was very little on the other side of the biotic system that was taking up that oxygen and producing carbon dioxide, essentially balancing the equation. So we ended up with very oxygenated Earth, essentially oxygen poisoning, which killed off a lot of life at the time, but which enabled a lot of the life forms that we see now to exist, because they required that much more energetic molecule in order to survive. These large reservoirs is certainly one of the keys that's going to be very hard to mimic. However, especially if we consider things like other planets, some of that is certainly doable. If you can really access the quite significant reserves of water ice, say on Mars, then you have the opportunity to start using these reserves significantly to help supply a lot of these excess requirements, that even if things start to grow a bit and start to unbalance, some of those reserves can be added in to help keep things stable. That was certainly one of the issues with Biosphere 2 as well. When you have these limited things and you're carefully managing all of them but don't have excess available, then when your oxygen starts to dip, because as they noticed at one point the concrete was basically sucking it up, you don't have a good replacement option. And that is something I think we're going to need to see a lot more of in future biotic systems as they go along, if we wanted to build the aforementioned space stations or living spaces inside these giant tubes. They're going to have an excess reserve of all the key elements in order to ensure that we can let it flow in one direction or another and have some flexibility in order to absorb the major changes as they go along. And also, we need to be willing and able to move with some of these processes. Just as the Earth sometimes has significant changes over time to elements of its biosphere and has adapted over time, it's very hard to believe that we are going to be entirely static indefinitely. Now, how long those timeframes need to be and how much adaptability we need to go with is a very difficult question, and one very worth looking into. But a certain degree of flexibility and adaptability needs to exist and to be available so that we can deal with changing not just conditions inside, but also outside of whatever area is going on. After all, periodically, the Earth still has to deal with asteroid impacts and solar effects on it. It's not a closed system, not entirely. And so we have to have a system on Earth that also has been shown to be robust enough to survive some of these things, even when they are quite severe. And while we would work to avoid catastrophic impacts, we need to ensure that should severe impacts or effects happen, then they need to have survivability, sustainability, and reparability within the ecosystem to regrow and develop from. So anyway, some thoughts on ecosystem building. Certainly some fun things to think about and to expand on. We'll definitely have to build more of those in the future. And if you want to build a small ecosystem, definitely look into the concepts of terrariums and vivariums, as this is a semi-enclosed ecosystem. They can survive fairly well on their own without a lot of input, and are quite a lot of fun and very interesting opportunities to not just learn and explore, but also to create something that could improve your general environment, both through being more decorative and by producing useful chemicals sorting through the air and the like. Anyway, if you enjoy this, feel free to go through the usual like, subscribe, Dick, and I shall talk to you next time.